Good evening, all. It's my pride privilege to invite Dr. Poonam Malhotra Kapoor. Madam, I'm sure Madam needs no introduction. She's a teacher par excellence who is still playing a very vital role in grooming the budding cardiac anesthesiologist of the India. And she will be enlightening us on the role of strain and speckle tracking in echocardiography. Over to Madam.
Evening to all of you who are here today doing so much of good work at the end of a beautiful 4-day session, which only someone of the caliber of Dr. Mullidhar could have done, along with IACTA, Minnesota, Leipzig. And it's my proud privilege to be a part of IACTA, a lot of 14 years of NH, a lot of good friends from Minnesota and Leipzig, and be a part and a co-founder of the Simulation Society, which runs fellowships online for the last 4 or 5 years. But before that, let me thank the delegates who've done beautifully last 4 days to be more than 5,000 at all days. And as the last speaker, I will not be between you and your dinner. I would like to quickly go over my talk, but let me tell you, this is a talk which is the future of echo for us cardiac anesthesiologists in the OR and in the ICU. Why? Because you will see on your screen with the coming up of CFI, the functional imaging, and the ACMQ on the Philips as well as on the GE, you will see a lot of automated functional imaging. We are not there just to see the gross structures, we are there to see regional structures. Dr. Deepak Tempe, I salute him as a teacher always, has beautifully helped us in telling me a lot about what was happening in tissue Doppler imaging. I would not go into the details, but this video here should tell you that these are the 3 most important images that we need to do, whether it's transthoracic or transesophageal. As we talk about what is tissue Doppler, it is nothing but an advancement over the color flow Doppler that we were seeing. The Doppler shift takes care of the blood flow between the blood and the tissues. The myocardial tissue blood flow is at a lower intensity, but it moves faster, whereas the blood flow is always having lesser intensity and it moves more slowly. So to differentiate the interface between blood and tissue, a lot of configurations in the form of thresholding, threshold reject, filtering, aliasing, change in frame rates were brought about so that one could, in a large way, catch hold of this myocardial deformation or tethering and translate it through various computerized algorithms into a phase which we see on the screen and become more familiar with as far as numbers go. So in tissue Doppler, you're using a low pass filter which eliminates the signals which are brought about by the blood flow. And setup of the machine on TDI is activated by a button which allows decreasing the system gain. So you're decreasing the gain, you're increasing your frame rate to 100 hertz or more, and you are using low pass filters. When you do something like this, the Doppler shift which is obtained from the myocardial tissue motions are of higher amplitudes. They would be reflectivity of about 40 decibels and higher, and they would move about 10 times slower than blood with a velocity range between 0.06 to 0.24 meters per second. And when you see something like this, these are the pictures that you get. The high velocity, low amplitude of the tissue of the blood interacts with the tissue low velocity, high amplitude. This is what I was speaking of. To give you a tissue Doppler imaging, well described in the diastolic dysfunction. Remember, the myocardial fibers undergo 4 types of rotations. These are circumferential, then they move into thicken and thin the myocardium. They are radial as they move to and fro. They are rotational, as you see from the apex to the base. It is always the apex which is stationary. It is the base that moves towards the apex. And this is because our heart is a double helix, a right and a left-sided helix. And there is a shortening and lengthening of the global longitudinal fibers, which measure as global strain as deformation. So TDI of a mid-esophageal 4-chamber view, when you narrow it into a sector, your frame rate increases even more. And then you can use the myocardial velocities and you can interrogate the cardiac velocities as they show a motion trending. And patients with normal global LV function will have systolic velocities always greater than 7.5 centimeters per second, whereas velocities less than or equal to 5.5 centimeters per second would indicate an LV failure. So if you see the velocities and you see the interrogation of the velocity gradient, we're talking of motion of blood in the tissues, the myocardial tissues. We're talking of velocity of blood, and this velocity would be different in the septum, it would be different in lateral, posterior, and anterior region. If you see here, the lateral velocities would be much higher at all times than the septal, posterior, or anterior velocities. And depending on the cardiac cycle, which is most dependent on the aortic valve closure, at the opening of the mitral valve and the closure of the mitral valve, when we have the ejection period, we have from the beginning of the aortic valve, the isovolemic contraction and then the isovolemic relaxation. In between that is the mitral valve opening and closing. So when the aortic valve closes, you get one tissue area or one phasic tissue Doppler velocity movement per cardiac cycle. The previous echo machines were using at least 4 to 5 such beats to detect one cardiac cycle. Today, with what we've been seeing as promotion videos of the Epic, we are seeing one beat per cycle. That is how the technology has changed, and that is how you instantly, in real time, get so much about regional deformation and regional scarring tissue and regional ischemia that you are doing much, much better. So Doppler can be color-coded. You have the color-coded M mode on Doppler, which is very nicely seen. It is in motion. This is the curved M mode where small speckles can be seen as hyperechoic shadows in a four chamber, and these can be seen as the blood flow velocity moves in a cardiac cycle from the aortic valve opening and closure to the mitral valve opening and closure in a single beat. And this is what we are detecting on a very nice screen with tissue Doppler imaging. But then this is an advanced measurement which misses out the early disease of ischemic heart disease. Very many such things that we can see, and this is the era when we are measuring the ventricles. I'm sure there'll be an era when we'll be talking about the atrial strain as much as we talk about the ventricular strain, but enough to say that when we measure the ventricular functions, we look at all these. We look at DPTT, we look at MPIs, we look at Doppler indices, we look at quantitation, we look at mitral plane annular excursion. The good news is that with the coming up of the Doppler shift and the TDI, we moved our machines and our knowledge, thanks to the work done in the early 2000s, into strain and strain rate with myocardial mechanics. And tissue Doppler imaging is really out, but it gave us and paved the way for strain and strain imaging. So when you have tissue tracking, when you have 2D strain, you have spatial and temporal images processing. The acoustic speckles in both 2D as well as 3D allow for the calculation of myocardial velocity, strain, and strain rate. So going on to what is strain and strain rate from this brief introduction, let's say that you have two cricketers of great fame scoring 50 runs each, but the balls faced by them are different. So the strike rate of Beckham becomes 2.5, with that of Rahul Dravid 0.45. So the strain is the same, but the strain rate over a period of time, the deformation over a period of time is different. So when you have these different frame rates and different things, what you see is the velocity which moves over distance forms the strain rate, and the strain rate over time is the strain. So strain over time is strain rate, and the velocity over a distance is also the strain rate. How do we present the strain? It is a percentage. The shortening rate is always the strain rate per second. And this is the myocardial tethering that you see, like the toy train in a child which moves with friction or resistance over a railway track. You have the blood and the tissue interacting with resistance to give you myocardial shortening or lengthening, and this tethering transforms into strain and strain rate. So this is possible because you have a double helical structure, a right and a left side, which is causing the apex to move in a counterclockwise direction, and the base, which always moves towards the apex in a cardiac cycle, to move in a clockwise direction. So you have the base and the apex movement working and working, moving like the twisting of a towel, and that is why you see the spiral formation of the myocardial tissue, wherein you may have an ejection fraction of 60%, but your myocardial fibers are only shortening about 15%. So that is the importance of having the data acquisition done. Data acquisition, as I said, should overcome the reverberation and the aliasing artifacts. They should be done in such a way that you are able to see a screen, decrease your gain, increase your frame rate, and go for settings with blood uh, Doppler and tissue priority, with all transparency, with low velocity reject, and with thresholding. Avoid these hyperechoic signals, which are the reverberation artifacts. Avoid the aliasing artifacts. Basic parameters of trying to see the motion, trying to see the B panel, which is the velocity, trying to see the C panel, which is the strain rate, and coming up in a big way, the strain, the D panel are very, very important. But you must remember that it is in systole, in a short axis view, that the myocardial thickens, so that the mean thickness increases and will give positive systolic values and negative during diastole as the myocardium thins out. So these are our normal values. The normal strain in a percentage is about 18 plus minus 5 at the lateral annulus, lateral posterior and anterior surface, whereas at the septum it is slightly higher, about 22. The longitudinal strain rate is more at the septum, 1.5, and less at the lateral.
Raj, what happened? You people could not hear me?
So speckle tracking, if you see,
my God.
speckles are equally distributed within the myocardium. They change their position from frame to frame with the surrounding deformation and tissue motion. So this is what is happening in 2D, where we are seeing only X or Y axis, but in 3D tracking, we are seeing X, Y, and Z axis. And that is why today we have moved into 3D strain and 3D speckle tracking, with the ACMQ giving us real-time single beat quantified data, as I showed in my earlier video. So all of this can be measured: the displacement, the strain rate, the rotation, the twist rate, the torsion, and the untwisting. Why? Because you are seeing all the radial, circumferential, as well as the longitudinal fibers undergo rotation, twisting, and torsion all at the same time in 3D, because they are moving within the same pyramid, which is not possible in a 2D. So that's why your newer machines give you more values. Now let us see some clinical features where strain and strain rate and speckle tracking will help. This is how you get systolic radial strain. Systolic radial strain is a very important part when you have cardiomyopathy, whether dilated, hypertrophic, but most commonly in a hypertensive cardiomyopathy where the ejection fraction may be normal, where a patient may be asymptomatic, but when you do an echo on him, you will see these elongated LVs with these elongated curves coming on the strain rate. Now, this value would be somewhere around 20%, which is on the higher side. Or you have the circumferential strain due to shortening. Here you can see during diastole or end systole, there is, or early diastole especially, there is a shortening of the fibers happening. So when you have circumferential strain shortening, or you have a longitudinal strain shortening, because you see the longitudinal strain, which has been shown to be the most specific and the most sensitive marker in most of the CRT studies on cardiomyopathy or on patients who are on anti-cancer drugs and have developed cardiomyopathy, you will see that longitudinal strain shortening, with as it becomes more negative or as it becomes more positive, over and above minus 14 or 15%, brings about very, very definitive changes to an experienced eye that this strain could be a harbinger of more morbidity and mortality, especially we've seen in our transplant patient. Now, this is the Philips Epic machine that we just started to use in our cardiology cath lab. And here you can see the strain come on as minus 21% or minus 20%. Now, this would be near normal. You are seeing values which are not dipping too much. 7 segments of the LV are very beautifully quantified. You can just on from AP2 to AP3 to AP4, 4 segments where you can also come on to the bullseye, and both the epicardium and the endocardium are incorporated in this. And when you have the bullseye, it tells you in a minute, it is the inferior as well as the inferolateral septum and the inferoseptal septum, which is more affected than the apex. So your base is more affected than the apex. So this is how it helps us, the bullseye, the 17 segments, which when they are put, you can easily come to know which territory of the coronary artery, which area, the regional area is affected more. And it takes 5 to 7 minutes under experienced hands to do it. Speckle tracking can not just be done only in transthoracic, but also in transesophageal. This is a small value where we have been using the IE33 to do the same. Here we did not have ACNQ, we had the CNQ. This was not automated earlier. The same way you choose the apex and 3 points at end systole, get the best picture, adjust manually in this case, your endocardial and epicardial borders. In the epic also you can adjust manually. There is a feature to adjust manually. But when you do this, you have a correction, a linear compensation, which you can center your mitral annulus, and you can also do it on the right side. The right ventricular function and the right strain can be just seen as beautifully. And you can see that we have got in a minute minus 18 as the value, and this is near normal because the curves also of strain coming on and strain rate are near normal. So this is how you adjust. You can take any, you can see the dyskinesia and akinesia in this, the regional wall motion abnormality with an open eyeball as well. But the moment you put in your cursors and you get your readings on speckle tracking, you get minus 10%, and all your curves in all 7 segments tell you on the bullseye that this is the inferior and the posterior segment, which is more affected than the lateral or the upper part of the posterior segments. So cardiomyopathy is valvular disease, aortic stenosis. We've been talking of low gradient, low flows, aortic stenosis behaving dismally. We've started to do strain and strain rate in aortic stenosis to a large extent, and to our hold and behold, 12 patients that we've done, all of them have prolonged ventilation, the low flow, low gradient AS. And ischemic heart disease, it is the best to do today. It is over and above, just not TDI and ejection fraction, because ejection fraction is the gold standard like the PA catheter, but ejection fraction does not tell you anything. A patient on oncogenic therapy has induced disorders of cardiomyopathy, and this is the strain is the first to show more negativity or more positivity values in expert hands to tell you that this patient needs to step down or step up or more surgery needed. So it can also be calculated to harbor any diastolic dysfunction, and this diastolic dysfunction in the new machine comes on in a different color code than the systolic function. The systolic function is more of yellow and red in the epic, and here it is more frozen like the iceberg with more of blues and lighter shades in the diastole. And from diastole to early systole and to late systole, your 17 segments and which segment is affected can be very beautifully monitored. The yellow is normal. Anything here now, here your anterior, the bullseye shows the anterior, lateral, posterior, and the anteroseptal walls affected more. And the second one shows in the circumferential strain that it is the apical segments which are more affected than the basal segments. So the apical anteroseptal is more affected. It is excellent for telling us the difference between STEMI and non-STEMI much before an ECG or an ejection fraction can in the anginal syndrome. And circumferential strain, though being less studied, if it is seen in a normal, as a normal here in all yellow, in a patient with regional wall motion abnormalities or undergoing any kind of graft in being put, you can easily do in a minimally invasive of pump CABG as well, that it is the anteroseptal and the lateral wall which is affected. So do the bullseye, all 17 segments, see your strain values and see your strain rate values. The receiver operator curves in most of the studies which are being done from 2011 to 2017 have shown the area under the curve between the 4 of global longitudinal strain at par or even better with exercise testing with dobutamine or with echo alone. And to date in 2013, this is a study I'm quoting from Pandyan et al. And they said that in 19 studies in a meta-analysis of more than 2,100 patients, 84% sensitivity and 82% specificity. But with the newer machines with softer and better algorithms, which also tell us about the ischemic cardiomyopathy, the radial and the circumferential strain will be at par with the global longitudinal strain to give us more information. Now you see here a slide, the upper panel. These are a couple of my last slides. The dyssynchrony that you see in a cardiomyopathy patient. All these numbers, so many graphs are very mind-boggling to an onlooker. And you have done your best to detect the endocardial and the epicardial cushions, which are very important. The right image acquisition is very important. But the moment you give the cardiac resynchronization therapy, look at the decrease in synchrony. So this methodology takes care of post-systolic shortening, the PSS software, and it also tells us a lot about the synergisting algorithms that it has incorporated in it, which in a very swift way tell you about the dyssynchrony as well as the CRT results in a minute, whether to step up or step down your CRT therapy. Also note that in the GE machine, you have a 2-click control. You can drag your entire mitral annulus down using 2 clicks and get a value of your 4D TE or 4D transthoracic echo, showing the motion of any area you want to interrogate. This 2-click control on GE is a further enhancement over the ACMQ, which the EPIC has said, and we are moving from systolic strain into a diastolic strain and strain rate indices for estimations of LV filling pressures. This is where the CVP, which is outdated, and PCWP is better, your stroke volume variation is better. But tomorrow, I'm sure within a year, we'll be talking of a diastolic strain pattern or a number which will tell us our filling pressures. It's already telling us our filling pressures as more and more studies come in. So a global longitudinal strain more than minus 14% or less than 14% plus 14% has a very, very sensitive p-value. If you follow up these patients, and global longitudinal strain gives us very marked prognostic information about the therapy that is being, not just the anti-cancer, but any kind of therapy, whether it is revascularization or it is medication for an angina patient. As you can see, the functional improvement, measuring strain, whether a clinical diagnosis or a simple echo of LV functions with DPDT or ejection fraction alone, or you use the 3D strain with all its parameters as spoken about, it shows higher sensitivity and specificity in most of the values. Identification of dyssynchrony, evaluation of diastolic mechanics are of all prognostic value. But remember always, it is the right image acquisition, and this is what we as echocardiographers have to learn. It should be at end systole or early systole is near to diastole. So you must know what you're trying to measure. You must acquire the left panel here, shows the right way of monitoring and noting your speckles along the endocardial border, whereas the left shows the wrong way, and therefore a careful visual verification of the tracking, because speckle tracking and speckle training is actually acquisition of the image. So always mandatory, whether you do it manually or in the newer machines, you have someone, the algorithm do it for you. Your strain rate and your strain is here with you to stay. Get ready with knowing the curves, get ready with knowing the numbers, and get ready with analyzing them and interrogating them in your clinical practice so that your patient outcomes are good. We have in recent times done strain rate over 12 or maybe 9, I think, 9 heart transplant patients. And we can say for early graft rejection happening when the strain rate becomes more negative after minus 14. So as it becomes more negative or it goes beyond 25% more positive, we're seeing values of patients not doing well. And this is true on the LV side as well as on the RV side. The newer machines will show you that the RV should not be neglected. It is just as good. Therefore, to conclude, the strain rate is difference between these velocities, which are measured on TDI. Strain is integrating the strain rate over time. The pulse TDI is measuring always the peak velocity, which, as you've spoken and heard many speakers say, is more important than the mean one. The color TDI measures the mean velocity, therefore its specificity is less, and speckle tracking overcomes the best thing. It overcomes your angle interrogation in all loading conditions. And this is where, just as we used to say, acceleration time is very important because it doesn't take care of the loading conditions. We will be saying that speckle tracking is independent of loading conditions and therefore most helpful. I am the former TSS IACTA president, and I have been, as a family member, working with so many beautiful people in IACTA, but it is time we moved out of cardiac anesthesia with our fellow men in pulmonology, in emergency medicine, in pediatrics, in cardiac surgery, and cardiology, and bring together so many subjects of cardiac critical care, ECMO, ECHO, teach them ECHO, and learn from them more about our cardiac patients. So these online fellowships have been going on last 4 years under the banner of TSS, ECMO. We've just finished with the exam, cardiac critical care, ECHO, cardiodiabetes, cardiac nutrition, and patient blood management, telling you everything about patient blood. It is all available starting 15 September this year. The new batch, the 5th batch will start of the simulationsociety.net. You can contact us at any numbers. We've been writing books, and I have to thank so many authors and friends in IACTA who've contributed. But more than that, we've been doing journals. I'm very, very proud. And this is my thank you to Dr. Yatin Mehta, Dr. Deepak Tempe, Dr. Murli Chakravarti, Dr. Prabhat Tiwari, and of course, my best friend, Dr. Neema, for being editors of a beautiful journal, Annals of Cardiac Anesthesia. I can't tell you how happy one is to see that number of the impact factor. Kudos to all of you, but a standing ovation today to Dr. Murlidhar. You have done wonders. The first of its kind TE online over 4 days with more than 6,000, 5,000 people every day. Hats off. We all salute you from IACTA. Thank you all, and thank you the moderators and the panelists.
Thank you very much, madam, for giving us the overview of myocardial deformation imaging, which is an emerging technique having promising application with diagnostic, therapeutic, and prognostic values. No,
Dr. Poonam, can you unscreen your screen, please? And same time, I request a moment Dr. Priya to share her screen so that there are no technical hitches. You need to share your screen again, please.
Wait, doing that.
yes. Now, Dr. Priya is back with us from Germany, and I request her to start from where she has stopped and summarize the already presented slides. Over to madam.
Yo, just wait. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Madam.
Yes, we can see your screen. Go to the full screen mode or presentation mode. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Have patience.
Thank you.
So this is where we stopped, right? This is where we stopped, right? Is it? Can you hear me?
Please continue further from this point.
Okay. So I finished here. Now I go further. So the next indications, what I said is VADS, yeah, ventricular assist device. Now most of the patients who are in terminal heart failure stages get this, and you people have already heard of the 20-minute lecture on VAD. So our patient here is a 56-year-old male who got a VAD, a HeartMate 2 on year back. Now he comes to you with a dark urine, jaundiced. The problem was this man had some epistaxis, and the local doctor cut down his anticoagulation. So now he has got an INR which is subtherapeutic. He is high bilirubin, high LDH. So we all know here you are maybe with a thrombosis of the LVAD. So you have a 2-chamber view. You see the LV is dilated, the mitral valve is opening. You have your explained 4-chamber view, and you see that there is a mitral regurgitation. And here you have an aortic valve which is opening with each and every beat. So after your LVAD lecture, you know that this is not right, what is happening here. And we do a continuous wave Doppler in the outflow cannula, and we see that the systolic velocity is very high. So what are we supposed to look when we have such a patient? When you have a suspected pump thrombosis, the predictors are the systolic to diastolic velocity is high, the left ventricular end diastolic diameter is big, and the aortic valve opens with each and every beat. Do you think we should go ahead and do a CT scan? CT scan is also a very good modality because there are things which you don't see in TE. Like if you have a bend in the outflow cannula, you won't be able to see. Yeah, but the problem with CT is you can't see the inside of the cannula, right? And there are so much of artifacts in somebody's calling. There's so much of artifacts that you just cannot see certain things. So a TE with CT is better. Now, the patient was thrombolized with an RTPA and his everything improved, the flow improved, the power declined, and the LDH continued to fall. Now here you have another patient who is a HeartMate 3, a 40-year-old man who got the LVAD because of his viral myocarditis. So it was a bridge to recovery. And these were the settings what were done for the HeartMate 3. Within 12 hours after the surgery, the patient in the midnight suddenly deteriorates. His LVAD flow decreases to 2.3 liters. He becomes hemodynamically bad. The BP drops. The CVP increases. The nurse goes and tells the duty doctor, who was not bothered. There was some drains 1.5 hours before all this happened. You saw that there was 400 ml which came out from the drain, but the doctor was not bothered. Then this pump complication started. So we did an emergent TE to rule out the pump complication. And this is what you see. You can't make out what is this going on, you know. This is an LV, RV, is it a tamponade? What is it? So what we do is we try to manage with speed reduction. We gave a lot of volume and we supported the RV with Milrinone and NO. And then within 3 to 5 minutes, we see that the LV starts recovering. So this was volume depletion. Now, when you have an LVAD, two things which are very important, which must have been told: the position of the interventricular septum, so that you can optimize the speed, that the septum should not be pushed too much to the right and the septum should not be pushed too much to the left. And the speed should be a balance between high enough and low enough. High enough that the ventricle is unloaded and low enough to avoid complete AV closure. These are the things which should be remembered when you have an LVAD. Another indication what you have, you all know pericardial effusion, a small effusion, something like 10 millimeter, and a huge infusion, something like 25 millimeters. So you see this is a small effusion, right? Go ahead, you have an effusion which is moderate. And you further go ahead and you have an effusion which is really large. So here you have a case. You have a 40-year-old who is readmitted to the ICU after 8 days of his post-cabbage. He's in very bad state, high on catecholamines, ventilated, intubated, ventilated, cardiac enzymes normal, transthoracic windows difficult. So here this is a still image, absolutely difficult to make out what is going on. Cardiac tamponade, pericardiocentesis is done. And look, when you do the centesis, how the intracardial pressures start decreasing. And as it decreases, you see the ventricles going up, like they're blooming, you know, the ventricles are filling up. So the high intracardial pressures prevented a normal diastolic filling. This is what you see here. So, next case, we know after the orthopedic surgery or so, you have patients who suddenly get dyspneic, who are very unstable, and you think about pulmonary artery embolism, maybe in the main pulmonary artery or the right or the left. And the secondary signs of an acute pulmonary embolism is a dilated RV, a empty LV, and a septum which is going towards the left, and a tricuspid regurgitation. So let's see here this case. Elderly gentleman with all sorts of comorbidities, had some orthopedic surgery, admitted in the ICU, after an hour becomes desaturates, low EtCO2, hypotensive. Transesophageal echo done. Shows, this is a still picture. You look, interatrial septum pushed towards the left side, the RV is dilated. In the transgastric short axis view also, the RV is dilated. And here you have an RV dilated, which the mid diameter of the RV is more than 45 millimeters. And you see the apex is made more of by the RV instead of LV. And here you see a tricuspid regurgitation. And when we put the continuous wave Doppler on the TR jet, this is very important. You don't take home anything what I have said, at least take this home. When you put a continuous wave Doppler on a TR jet and you see a triangular, such a picture, a triangular picture, it means that this is a very severe TR. Then we put our cursor into the hepatic vein, and as Rajesh had told in his talk earlier, you have these waves. You see a wave, you see an S wave, yeah? The A wave is an atrial contractility wave and the S wave is a systolic wave, yeah? Now what happens? Normally the systolic wave is an antigrade wave. And here you see that the wave is retrograde. So a systolic hepatic flow reversal is a sure shot sign of a severe TR. But then you will ask me, that means if there is a severe TR, there should always be an retrograde systolic flow? No, it depends upon the diastolic function of the RA and the RV. So if the RA is very dilated or if there is a atrial fibrillation, you may not have it. But if you have it, it's a sign of severe TR. And we put, and look, you see embolus in the pulmonary artery, which was the cause for this. Now we have ARDS, we know about Berlin criteria, and the Berlin criteria states that if the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure is less than 16 or 18, then it's nothing to do with cardiac. So PA catheters are now not used in the non-cardiac ICUs. So let's see here for a patient who is a 62-year-old gentleman with congestive cardiac failure, comes to the ICU, ventilated with a very high PEEP, but he stays hypoxic. You keep increasing the PEEP, he deteriorates. We did a transthoracic echo, nothing conclusive. Transesophageal echo done. You see the bubble test. You see that in even less than 3 beats, you see the bubbles going into the LA and you know what is happening. You know that there's a right to left shunt because of a patent foramen ovale. So what important is that when you do an assessment, you should always look out for PFO because 30% of the population has a PFO. And in such a situation, you keep increasing the PEEP and you keep increasing the shunt. Next case is again an elderly gentleman, very obese with obstructive sleep apnea, with COPD, sudden dyspnea, becomes very bad, goes into florid pulmonary edema, intubated, T-classic done and a CT done. Patient on stiff catecholamines. And this is the X-ray. Zoom, left is white out. So we do a CT. CT shows infiltrates on both sides, but more on the left side. We do a transthoracic, very, very poor image. I'm absolutely not able to make out that what is this? Is it an endocarditis? Is it a flail or is it a prolapse? No idea. So go ahead. Patient is still very, very bad on 100% FiO2, high PEEPs, very bad, noradrenaline. We do a transesophageal. And what do we see here? We see a flail of P3 and P2. And so the patient is taken up in the OR and a mitral valve replacement is done. After the mitral valve replacement, the patient improves, contractility improves, and in 2 days, everything is weaned off. Patient is stable. Look at the X-ray. Perfect. Now you people can ask me that why did this happen? Just the left side is white out. Why? Now I ask you the same question. Just think it over and then answer. If not, then I will answer. The next is, we talked about pericardial tamponade, but you can still have localized small thrombus, which will not produce signs of tamponade, but the patient is very unstable. So look at this case. This is a 71-year-old who had a CABG 3 days back with an aortic valve replacement. He's in a rapid AF. He's bad, severely hypotension, paced on a ventilatory support. We do a transthoracic, can't see anything. Did a transesophageal, and what do we see? We see that there is an inverted right atrial wall and there is a hematoma sitting. So we do the surgical removal of this extra cardiac clot, and you will be really surprised that the clot was not so big. So just have a look. And imagine the symptoms the patient had with this. So this was the clot which came out. The next is vegetations. We all know that the patients these days with even native valve endocarditis is very common. Prosthetic valve is so very common. And so who has fatigue, anemia, embolic events, and positive blood cultures for Staph aureus. We do an echo and we see vegetations on both the valves. This was the reason for his cerebral embolic events. You can also look at for abnormal valvular function and prosthetic valve abnormal functions. So here you have a case, double valve replacement 10 years ago for endocarditis, now comes to you with shortness of breath and reduced exercise tolerance. TTE shows a functional mitral stenosis. You do a TE, and in India, you find this is very, very common. See the fluoroscopy and look at the echo. You have a stuck mitral valve. Why do we have it? Because people are not properly anticoagulated. This is another lady who had an aortic valve replacement for AS and AR. You see the high gradient of around almost 90 millimeters in the aortic valve. After she was shifted to the ICU, there was gross ST changes. And even before we could get a CK levels and CKMB levels, we see from this echo that the walls are totally hypokinetic. And so the patient goes back to the OR, and we see that there is a calcium deposit which was sitting on the RC ostia, and that was taken off, ECG normalized, and we came off CPB. Next case, patient had a mitral valve replacement 5 years back, now in persistent heart failure, severe pulmonary hypertension. We do a look at this, the same, PANIS, anticoagulation not proper.
Dr. Priya, no need to show the cases, you can just conclude.
Okay. No, there's nothing to conclude. Okay, just a moment. I will conclude.
Apologies.
So, this is the last slide. Rajan, I'll just finish here. So we, however, believe that TEE is beyond the skill of a normal North American intensivist. What they say in this last slide is the anesthesiologists, especially the cardiac anesthesia-based intensivists who are trained in advanced echo, they are the best. And thanks to Dr. Muralidhar, who has been taking this forward in India for all of us. So please get certified, increase your knowledge, especially critical care medicine practitioners. You should develop skills for both TEE and TTE. Thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you very much, madam, and apologies for not giving you time because we are running.
It's okay. I know. It's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for getting through all these technical issues. Nice job.